Hi everyone, hope that you're all doing well. In this series, we're going to go a bit in depth into the history of the ancient land we call Canaan. It's a part of the world that has fascinated me since I was a kid, and I'm sure that's true for many of you as well. There's definitely a lot to cover, but I'll do my best to make it as easy to digest as well as interesting for you. So without further delay, let's begin. First though, let's start with where Canaan is and just who the people that we call the Canaanites were. Generally speaking, Canaan is the land that we identify with the area known as the Levant. Our modern political boundaries would roughly equate it with the regions occupied today by Israel, the Palestinian territories, Western Jordan, Lebanon, and the coast and some of the inland parts of Syria. Thus, in a very broad sense, the term Canaanite refers to the ancient peoples and cultures who lived within this land. However, though similar in many ways, the ancient Canaanites were not a uniform group. By the Bronze and Iron Ages, they were divided up into a number of different tribal groups, city-states, and kingdoms, each with its own distinctive cultural traits, political institutions, as well as social customs. In written records, we start to hear of a people who archaeologists have identified as Canaanites in archives from the city of Mari. The cuneiform tablets, which are written in Akkadian and from the 19th century BCE, use the word Kinaanu in conjunction with thieves causing trouble in a town called Rahisum. Other references are found in tablets from the city of Ebla, which, like Mari, is also located in Syria. We also see similar words in Egyptian sources, such as those of Pharaoh Amenhotep II and later in the Amarna letters. And of course, Canaanites are also mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. However, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. In this program, I want to expose you to a more complete picture of Canaan going back thousands of years earlier than its first mention in written records. Actually, before the invention of writing itself. Let's start over 10,000 years ago, around the year 8500 BCE. Geographically, Canaan's position in the ancient world was very unique. With Anatolia to the north, Mesopotamia to the east, Egypt to the southwest, and the expanse of the Mediterranean Sea to the west, the land of Canaan found itself at one of the most important commercial and cultural crossroads of antiquity. Much of our knowledge about the prehistory of Canaan comes from the archaeological excavations at the site of Jericho. You've probably heard this name. Located about 11 kilometers northwest of the Dead Sea, many scholars believe that Jericho was the first true city in the world. It's also famous in a biblical story where it's the first site that the Israelites captured west of the Jordan River. Under the command of Joshua, they besieged the city for 7 days, marching around its walls and blowing their trumpets until finally the city's walls collapsed and the Israelites took over and pretty much destroyed the place. Though the first excavations of Jericho were started as early as 1868, it was really British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon between the years 1952 to 1958 who really revealed how old and complex the city was. She and her team uncovered a sequence of occupation phases dating at least as far back as the Neolithic Age, which were the years roughly between 8500 to 4500 BCE. In a nutshell, the Neolithic Age was the final phase of the Stone Age and the time when humans began to first farm the land. Jericho's history, though, probably goes back even before the Neolithic Age. Evidence has been found for what seems to have been a type of sanctuary constructed near the spring of Ain Sultan. It was probably the spring that enabled hunter-gatherers to finally put down roots in the area. While initially they may have lived in flimsy, non-permanent, tent-like dwellings, eventually they built more stable structures built of mud brick. Thus, by the 10th millennium BCE, we see at Jericho the early transition from the nomadic life of hunter-gatherers to the sedentary one of simple farmers and the domestication of some animals, which are actually hallmarks of the Neolithic Revolution. One should be aware, though, that this change didn't happen overnight, but probably over the span of about 1,000 years. By around 7000 BCE, Jericho had developed into a pretty sizable settlement. it had defensive walls and at least one well-constructed stone tower. This made it a real town, and it may have contained 2,000 people or more. Jericho, though, was an anomaly. Most settlements in the Levant around this time were still little more than unwalled villages. One really interesting aspect of the people who lived in Jericho during this time is that their dead were often buried below the floors of their houses, and in many instances, the skulls of the bodies were removed and then carefully refashioned with plaster in an attempt to build up some of the facial features. Many had shells placed in the empty sockets of the skull to represent eyes, and were further decorated with red and black paint to depict individual characteristics, such as hair and even mustaches. Scholars believe that these plastered skulls are evidence of some sort of ancestor cult. Other remarkable discoveries that have helped scholars to document Canaanite history were made at the site of Ain Ghazal, just outside of modern Amman, Jordan. Here, buried in a pit which had been dug into the floor of an abandoned house, was found a cache of extraordinary statues and figurines. The number of settlements in the land of Canaan increased greatly during the period from the mid-5th to the end of the 4th millennium BCE. This is a period known as the Chalcolithic or Copper Age. An example of one such settlement was found at the site of Teliat Gasul, comprising of at least 60 acres and containing rectangular-shaped, well-constructed mud brick houses. Teliat Gasul is one of the largest Chalcolithic settlements to have been discovered east of the Jordan River. During the Chalcolithic period, the local Canaanite metal industry was just starting to take shape, with items made of copper becoming more commonplace in everyday life. These included anvils, crucibles, mace heads, sickles, altars, and what seemed to have been decorative objects such as jewelry. The designs of these pieces also became more intricate, with elaborate geometric patterns and more sophisticated representations of the human form, such as face masks and figurines. Objects crafted from ivory have also been found, meaning that by this time, some international trade with Africa was taking place. Something interesting, though, happens around the 4th millennium BCE. The archaeological record goes silent. Basically, most Chalcolithic sites in the region were abandoned, permanently, and it's not known why. There are, though, a few hypotheses that archaeologists and even geologists have come up with. Some have postulated that there might have been an extended period of drought that forced people to abandon these settlements for greener pastures elsewhere. That seems to be the most plausible explanation, since evidence of a foreign invasion or a violent, hostile takeover is not supported by archaeological findings. By the end of the 4th millennium BCE, urban, and to a great extent literate civilizations had been established in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and in parts of Syria along the Euphrates. Given its location, it's only natural that communities in Canaan would follow suit. Archaeologists believe that by 3300 BCE, foreign groups of people had migrated into the region from the north and established new sites in places that were close to useful natural resources such as streams, good farmland, and in several cases, metal deposits. As food surpluses grew, so too did the specialization of labor, international trade networks, and the size of these communities, so that by the 3rd millennium BCE, several prosperous towns and cities had developed. Like their neighbors in Mesopotamia and Egypt, the Canaanites had entered the Bronze Age. Along with better tools fashioned from bronze, which is an alloy made up of mostly copper and tin, the early Bronze Age in Canaan also saw the development of stronger and more effective defensive structures, such as city walls. No longer made out of mud brick, these walls were massive and built out of stone, often with circular or semicircular bastions at various intervals. Ruins at the site of Arad are one of the best preserved examples of this, but Jericho also has something similar. Evidence shows that its early mud brick walls, believed to have been only 1 meter thick, by 2500 BCE, were made of stone and nearly 5 meters thick. So what about the political situation during this early Bronze Age period? Unfortunately, in the absence of any written records, this is not as easy to determine as, say, in the city-states of Mesopotamia or Egypt of the same period. However, it's likely that Canaan was composed of independent city-states, each that controlled an area within its immediate vicinity, as well as nearby villages. The size of these cities, really we should be using the word town, was quite small in comparison to those of Egypt and Mesopotamia. For example, the largest Canaanite cities probably had no more than 3,000 to 5,000 people at any time, while those in Egypt and Mesopotamia had populations in the tens of thousands. It's also hard to definitively state which city-states may have dominated others. There are plenty of instances where the defenses of various towns were destroyed and repaired, so it was by no means a peaceful time. Those with greater military capabilities and resources would have held sway and influence over their less powerful neighbors. For example, at Jericho, the walls in certain areas have been repaired at least 17 times due to battle damage, probably mostly from conflicts with neighboring cities, but perhaps also from enemies abroad. It's known that from time to time, Egyptian campaigns were launched against Canaanite towns, especially in the south. However, there's very little evidence to suggest that this resulted in any long-term Egyptian political control of the region. That would come centuries later. There were, however, long-term Egyptian trade missions to Canaan, mostly for luxury goods such as wine, fine pottery, olive oil, and a special type of jug, called the Abydos jug, because it was found in royal tombs of early pharaohs in the city of Abydos. The name, though, is a misnomer. The jug actually originated in Canaan, and many more examples of it have been found there. Both Canaan and Egypt provided markets for each other's goods. There were two ways that this commerce flowed. One was via land routes, through the Sinai Desert and into southern Canaan on donkey caravans. More inland cities had strong commercial ties with cities in modern Syria, such as Ebla, Aleppo, and Damascus. The other route was by sea. Ships would leave Egyptian ports in the Nile Delta and dock in cities such as Byblos on what's today the Lebanese coast. Here, they would pick up large quantities of timber for transport back to Egypt. Like in our own times, economic prosperity didn't last and was affected by unforeseen, extraneous circumstances. Towards the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, the Old Kingdom in Egypt began to weaken and then finally collapsed. This led to the near halt of trade with Canaan. Thus, from about 2200 to 2000 BCE, many of the towns and cities in southern and central Canaan lost their most profitable markets and commercial partners in Egypt, putting their societies into a deep recession. Many cities saw large chunks of their populations migrate to other places, and in some cases, they were completely abandoned. Due to the new economic reality, the intricately designed luxury vessels and items of the past were replaced with less decorative but functionally superior ones. New technologies appeared, such as a type of faster wheel and stronger bronze alloys, and improved casting techniques for weapons, including a new type of axe called the fenestrated or eye axe due to its shape. Cities in northern Canaan fared much better during the period of recession. Since their trade was less reliant on Egypt and more tied to the cities of Syria such as Ebla, Aleppo, and Damascus, they were better able to weather the storm. The population of their cities, such as those of Hatzor and Megiddo, don't seem to have changed too much, and overall, the effects of the Great Canaanite Recession were not felt as much as in the south. Things would pick up again around 2000 BCE during the start of the Middle Bronze Age. Canaan would become embroiled in the politics of the budding and growing powers of the region. In some cases, this was beneficial, while in others, detrimental. We'll take a closer look at that in the next program on ancient Canaan. Stay tuned. Once again, thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you learned something or just enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. Also check out the History with Sai podcast for more bonus material. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Take care.